The summer of 1944 carried a tension unlike any other moment in the war. The Allied advance in France was accelerating, German fuel reserves were bleeding away, and every day brought whispers of new aircraft appearing over the Western Front, faster, tougher, and seemingly impossible to stop. German intelligence officers were desperate for anything that could turn the tide. And then, in early August, something extraordinary happened. A fully intact American F-4U Corsair was captured. It had made an emergency landing on a remote stretch of farmland in occupied territory, its pilot rescued just in time by friendly units before being taken prisoner. But the aircraft, scarred, bent, and stubbornly rugged, remained upright, its wings folded like a giant bird at rest. To the Germans, it was nothing short of a treasure. A machine that had been tormenting Axis forces in the Mediterranean and the Pacific suddenly delivered into their hands. For weeks, German aircrews had complained about a blue demon that dove from the sun, accelerated like nothing they had ever faced, and shrugged off damage that should have torn lesser planes apart. Reports described it clawing upward with brutal torque, hammering across the sky with a massive engine, and snapping into tight turns that made gunners curse under their breath. Until now, they had only seen it from the wrong end of its guns. But on this day, they could finally open its wings, crawl into its cockpit, and see what made it so special. The order was immediate. Find Germany's best experimental test pilot, someone fearless, meticulous, and utterly loyal. They selected a veteran flyer named Hauptmann Otto Kenner, a man who had flown everything from early Focke-Wulfs to cutting-edge prototypes with engines that sometimes exploded on the runway. He was trusted because he could feel an aeroplane's secrets through his fingertips, and he was respected because he never exaggerated, never panicked, and never hesitated. When he first approached the captured Corsair, he didn't speak. Ground crews watched him walk slowly around the machine, running his hands along the thick titanium cowling, tapping the rivets, and studying the massive bent wings that gave the Corsair its unmistakable silhouette. Those wings weren't just curved, they were aggressive, almost defiant. To Kenner, they looked like a challenge. But the real shock came when he inspected the heart of the beast, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. A monstrous twin-row, 18-cylinder machine that German mechanics described as too large to be sensible. It was heavier than the engines used in most Luftwaffe fighters. Yet the Americans had somehow managed to tame it, cool it, and strap it into a fighter that behaved like a racer. The Corsair's landing gear was equally surprising. Instead of the fragile, narrow legs the Germans were used to, this aircraft had thick, robust struts shaped to endure brutal carrier landings. Even on the ground, it felt like a predator built to slam onto steel decks at impossible speeds. For 2 days, Kenner studied the cockpit, intuitive, practical, and surprisingly comfortable. The American style was different, fewer hidden switches, more bold markings, and gauges that could be read even in violent maneuvers. Everything felt engineered with the pilot in mind, not the production line. But time was short. High command demanded answers within hours, not days. Allied fighters were sweeping deeper into Germany's shrinking territory, and the Luftwaffe needed to know how to counter this machine before it became a frontline nightmare in Europe. At dawn on August 14, 1944, Kenner prepared to take off in the stolen Corsair. The airfield was quiet, except for the nervous murmurs of mechanics and officers. No German pilot had ever flown a Corsair before, and no one knew how it would behave under a fully German test regime. Fuel was limited. Every drop was precious. Command allowed him only 45 minutes in the air. 45 minutes to understand why this aircraft dominated every battlefield where it appeared. 45 minutes to unlock its strengths, uncover its weaknesses, and perhaps, if he was lucky, discover something that could help defend the crumbling Reich. As he tightened his harness and lowered himself into the cockpit, Kenner felt a rare flicker of excitement. He knew this would not be a normal test flight. This was a race against time, and the world outside the cockpit was collapsing fast. But in the sky, he would be alone with the truth, just a man, a machine, and the thin line between mastery and disaster. The mechanics stepped back. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared awake with a deep, thunderous growl that sent vibrations through the ground. Soldiers standing nearby exchanged tense looks. Even they could tell this was not like the fighters they knew. Kenner pushed the throttle gently, and the Corsair began rolling toward the Kenner runway. The wind caught the bent wings, and for a moment the plane seemed to lift itself slightly, eager to be airborne again. As the wheels left the ground and the airfield fell away behind him, Kenner finally understood why Allied pilots loved this aircraft. The Corsair didn't climb, it leaped. It didn't accelerate, it surged. And in that first breathless minute, somewhere high over occupied France, the German test pilot realized he might not be evaluating this aircraft at all. He might be wrestling with a legend. At 3,000 feet, Otto Kenner leveled the Corsair and eased the throttle forward. The surge of power was unlike anything he had felt, even in the fastest German prototypes. The nose didn't just rise, it punched upward with a force that pinned him into the seat. The aircraft climbed as if gravity were only a suggestion. Kenner glanced at the manifold pressure, then at the engine temperature, expecting to see something unstable or dangerous. Instead, everything remained steady, almost calm, as if the engine enjoyed being pushed. He rolled the aircraft gently left and right, feeling the response. The stick was heavy but honest, demanding strength but rewarding precision. The Focke-Wulf 190 was known for its stability, but this was different. This was controlled aggression. The Corsair didn't wait for the pilot to think, it anticipated him. Every correction, every micro-adjustment felt natural, as if the machine's movements were connected to the nerves in his fingertips. Kenner pushed the nose down slightly and increased speed. The canopy trembled, the wings hummed, and the Corsair began slicing through the air at a pace that startled him. German intelligence reports had claimed the aircraft could exceed 400 miles per hour in a shallow dive. He now believed those estimates were conservative. The drag profile of those bent wings, which some German engineers had mocked, actually reduced compressibility issues at high speed. The more he flew it, the less odd those wings seemed. They were purposeful. He banked harder, testing its turn radius. The Corsair responded with a sharp, biting angle that made his stomach shift. No hesitation, no wing shudder, no tendency to snap into a stall. Most fighters demanded caution at the limit, but this plane encouraged him to push further. It was rugged yet elegant, a contradiction that made perfect sense only when felt in motion. Kenner had flown the Spitfire once on a captured test flight months before, and he'd admired its finesse. But the Corsair was a different creature entirely. It didn't dance. It dominated. He accelerated again, this time into a shallow climb. The massive radial engine bellowed, pulling the aircraft upward with relentless determination. Kenner watched the altimeter spin and muttered under his breath. It wasn't just fast, it was relentless. A trait that made it deadly in both offensive and defensive combat. A Corsair pilot could engage or disengage at will, choosing the terms of every fight. He tested the roll rate next, snapping the stick left, then right. The Corsair flipped with surprising speed for its size. The Germans had assumed that its bulky shape made it slow to roll, but instead it behaved with the confidence of a seasoned duelist, broad shoulders, quick reflexes. By now he had burned nearly half his allotted fuel. He needed to test stall behavior. This was often where American fighters revealed their weaknesses. He eased power back, lifted the nose, and waited for the shudder. It never came. Instead, the Corsair eased into a gentle buffet, giving ample warning before dropping the nose softly. No wing drop, no violent snap. It recovered smoothly with minimal input. Even at the edge of aerodynamic control, the aircraft refused to betray its pilot. For a moment, Kenner just sat back in the seat, astonished. This aircraft wasn't merely fast or powerful, it was forgiving. A machine that allowed inexperienced pilots to survive mistakes and experienced pilots to perform miracles. In a brutal war where training hours had dropped dramatically, that alone was a significant advantage. He checked his watch. He had 15 minutes left, time to test combat behavior. He simulated evasive maneuvers, high G vertical climbs, split S dives, barrel rolls, energy-conserving turns. The Corsair absorbed everything, demanding only that the pilot respect the engine and monitor torque. It fought against him only once during a rapid acceleration in a steep dive when the torque pulled slightly right. But even then, it telegraphed the problem early, letting him correct before it became dangerous. The guns had been removed, but he traced imaginary firing arcs, aligning the nose with the horizon. The visibility over the long snout was limited, yes, but not as severe as German intelligence had claimed. In combat, the Corsair pilot wouldn't peck aimlessly. He would strike in fast, aggressive passes, using speed and altitude advantage. Once mastered, the aircraft became a predator, built for hit-and-run lethality. Kenner knew that aircraft strength came from more than performance alone. It came from what the pilot believed. The Corsair gave its pilot confidence, the kind that tilted battles long before bullets were fired. The Germans had been losing veteran aces at a rate they could no longer replace, while the Allies trained thousands of new pilots on machines exactly like this, machines that made them brave. 10 minutes left. Kenner pushed the Corsair into one final test, a full-throttle, maximum performance dive. The nose dipped, the airspeed climbed rapidly, and the aircraft screamed downward. Lesser fighters would rattle or compress, but the Corsair remained almost shockingly stable. The bent wings, again, proved their worth. They delayed compressibility forces, allowing the aircraft to dive steeper and faster without losing control. He pulled out of Riblingda, the dive, expecting strain or vibration. Instead, the aircraft eased into level flight, as if nothing had happened. At that moment, he understood the truth he had been searching for ever since the engine first roared to life. The Corsair wasn't unstoppable because of a single innovation. It wasn't the wings, or the engine, or the build quality. It was the combination, the harmony of everything working together. Rugged construction, immense power, predictable handling, high dive speed, excellent climb, forgiving flight characteristics, and the psychological edge it handed to the pilot strapped inside. It was a machine built not to impress engineers on paper, but to save the life of the person flying it. Kenner looked down at the patchwork farmland passing beneath him, at the roads filled with convoys and retreating troops, at the distant horizon that seemed to shrink every day. The war was turning, and this aircraft was one of the reasons why. With only a few minutes of fuel left, he turned back toward the airfield. The Corsair responded effortlessly, the engine steady, the frame unshaken. Even in descent, the aircraft felt like it wanted to stay aloft forever, refusing to surrender its advantage. Kenner exhaled slowly. He had learned more in 45 minutes than he expected to learn in a week, but what he did with that knowledge and what Germany could actually do about it was another question entirely. The runway appeared ahead of Otto Kenner like a thin grey scratch on the landscape, shimmering in the summer heat. He lowered the Corsair gently, feeling the unusual bounce of its carrier-hardened landing gear. Even that impressed him. German fighters were precise machines, but fragile. This aircraft felt like it could slam into the ground at twice the speed and still roll away with barely a complaint. As the wheels touched down, the Corsair thudded heavily onto the dirt airstrip, kicking up clouds of dust. Kenner held the stick firm, letting the aircraft slow without complaint, its wings wide and confident in the wind. When he finally rolled to a stop, the airfield went quiet. Ground crews rushed forward, half expecting smoke or damage, or some sign that handling such a machine had pushed it too far. But the Corsair simply sat there, rumbling softly, almost smugly, as if proud of the demonstration it had given. Kenner cut the engine. The thunder faded into a ticking heartbeat as the metal cooled. He sat motionless for a moment, staring at the instruments, listening to the faint settling creaks of the airframe. Then he climbed out, dropping to the ground with the expression of a man who had glimpsed the future of air combat and knew his side was not prepared for it. Officers surrounded him immediately. They peppered him with questions, scribbling down everything he said. But his first words silenced them. "It has no weakness," he said quietly. "Only limitations." The officers exchanged looks. Limitations could be exploited. Weaknesses could be weaponized. But Kenner wasn't offering comfort. He was warning them. He explained that the aircraft's size was only a disadvantage in inexperienced hands. Once understood, The power-to-weight ratio turned the Corsair into a force that could dive past enemy fighters, climb away before they could respond, and endure punishment that would tear apart German airframes. Its speed, stability in dives, and astonishing ruggedness meant it could survive encounters that would doom even a seasoned Luftwaffe pilot. He spoke of the stall behavior, the forgiving controls, the stability under extreme stress. These were the traits Germany desperately needed at that stage of the war, traits their overstretched industry could no longer build, and their dwindling pilot corps could no longer train to master. The officers wrote every word, but their faces darkened as the truth settled around them. Kenner was ushered into a briefing room hours later to present a formal summary to High Command representatives. He described how the Corsair blended raw strength with pilot-friendly engineering, a combination the Luftwaffe had underestimated. It was not just a fast fighter. It was a survivable fighter, a pilot's aircraft, an aircraft built to win battles not through precision manufacturing alone, but through margin for error, margin for damage, margin for survival. The room fell silent when he finished. Everyone understood the subtext, even if no one dared say it. The Luftwaffe, battered and fuel-starved, had little hope of matching American production or raw engine output. Germany could design faster aircraft on paper, yes, but they could not build thousands of rugged, reliable Corsair equivalents in the collapsing months of 1944. That night, Kenner walked alone along the edge of the airfield where the Corsair sat guarded under tarps and camouflage nets. Its bent wings cast dark shadows in the moonlight. He rested a hand on the metal, cowling, still warm from the day's flight. For a moment, he wondered what it would have been like to fly this machine in real combat, how different the war might have felt with such a beast at his side, instead of prototypes that failed more often than they flew. But that thought faded quickly. He knew the truth. Even if Germany had captured 10 of these machines, or 100, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. The Allies produced aircraft like the Corsair, the way Germany once produced bicycles by the thousands, with near-flawless consistency. There was no countering that, not anymore. Within days, American forces pushed deeper into France. The airfield where the Corsair was examined would soon be abandoned. In the confusion of retreat, the Germans destroyed the aircraft rather than let it fall back into Allied hands. Kenner watched the flames consume it, the fire turning the once mighty machine into twisted metal. It felt like burning a book full of answers he wished he had never learned. Years later, after the war, Kenner would recall those 45 minutes as the flight that taught him more about modern air combat than any battle he fought. Not because the Corsair dazzled him with a single talent, but because it overwhelmed him with balance. It was proof that a war machine was more than steel and horsepower. It was the sum of thoughtful design, reliable manufacturing, and the knowledge that a pilot's life was worth protecting. And that, more than anything, was the advantage Germany had lost. An advantage the Allies carried all the way to victory. The captured Corsair never flew again. But the memory of that test flight lingered in Otto Kenner's mind long after the war's end. He often said the aircraft felt alive, like a creature determined to carry its pilot home at any cost. For him, those 45 minutes were not just a test, they were a revelation.